Aaron, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into farming in the first place.
Well, I'm a fifth generation farmer. Our family's been farming this area for over 150 years. And so I grew up on the farm. I grew up farming with my family. And so it really is a way of life for us and for our whole community. We live in a farming community, and we've really been privileged to be able to farm and to be a part of this community.
And what kind of things do you farm? What do you grow and sell?
Well, we grow corn and soybeans and oats, and we harvest forages to make hay for our neighbors who are raising livestock.
And you're also president of the Iowa Farmers Union. So tell me about that union and what your job entails.
So we are a group of over 1,000 members from around the state of Iowa. We are mostly comprised of small and medium-sized family farmers. Sometimes they're growing commodities, sometimes they're growing food for their communities.
You all just had your annual meeting where 200 members of the Farmers Union gathered in Iowa. What were some of the things you all talked about, and what was the mood of farmers at that meeting?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's not good this time of year. We should have our planting plans in place. We should be ready to go to the fields. We should have our financing lined up. All things should be go at this point. But unfortunately, there's a lot of uncertainty, whether it be with the tariffs that we're facing or some USDA programs that have been cut and no longer reliable. A lot of nervousness about what we're going to be facing in these coming years.
Let's talk about tariffs, because that obviously is something that has farmers like you pretty unnerved. But before we talk about what's happening now, this is not your first rodeo. Something happened in 2018 with tariffs, and that was during Donald Trump's first term. Can you talk about that and the impact it had on farmers?
Yeah, we took a go it alone approach in trade a little over 5 years ago as well. And rather than working with our trade partners and trying to develop a plan, a strategic plan that could help farmers with our trade, we took a go it alone approach, and that meant that we were going to be we as farmers were going to be the ones facing the consequences when other countries retaliated against our tariffs. So we put tariffs on them, they put tariffs on us, and what's the first thing they put tariffs on? Our farm products. And that means our prices started to drop. So this is not the first time around with our trade wars.
Tell us exactly what a tariff is and how it impacts a farmer like you.
Yeah, a tariff is a type of tax that you put on a product that comes into your country. And farmers rely on trade, and the more of a tax that's placed on the product we're trying to sell, the harder it is for us to sell it at a good price. So when we put a tax on what was coming into our country, other countries said, okay, we're going to put a tax on what's coming out of your country. And that meant, first of all, things that we grow, our corn, our soybeans, our pork. And that really hits the bottom line right away. When a lot of times what farmers do when they get up in the morning is they check what's happening in the markets overseas, and then they check at the opening, and then several times during the day. And the markets tell us that when you take an approach like this, it's going to mean lower prices right away and a lot of pessimism for what farmers can receive for what we sell, even months and years into the future.
Do you all rely more on exporting than importing?
Well, we rely a lot on exporting for what we sell. We do have some important imports that we rely on. Fertilizer, for example. And there's just a very few people who sell fertilizer that farmers in Iowa need. A lot of it comes from overseas. So when we place a tariff on what's coming in, that means we're going to pay more for what we have to put in the ground for fertilizer and other products. And then when they put a tariff on us, it means it's harder for us to sell when we sell it. The price is going to be lower. And what that means is that we're kind of getting on both ends. We're paying more for what we need to buy to put the crop in the ground. We're getting less for what we grow. And yeah, sometimes there are legitimate trade issues you need to correct. You work through those. You negotiate in good faith with established trade partners. But when it's just tit for tat, up, down, left, right, usually the farmers are going to be one of the first people in our economy who are going to feel it.
Can you explain how these retaliatory tariffs that other countries are placing on you, how it actually affects your ability to sell what you're growing overseas?
Yeah, it means that if we were to sell overseas, it becomes too expensive for those countries to buy from us. They'll go to another country and farmers in other places in the world to try to find better markets there, better trade partners there. So that means that fewer people want to buy what we're growing, and that means that it's worth less. The supply, the demand for our product goes down, our price goes down.
In fact, before tariffs took effect, Aaron, Mexico was the top buyer of Iowa corn. China's top American import from the US was soybeans. And Canada, by the way, showing the other side of the coin, was a key supplier of adolescent hogs that were finished in the state, which I guess means they became big hogs and then were slaughtered for pork. Without these relationships, it really messes up your whole way of life.
It really does. We depend on these markets. We depend on these relationships. In fact, farmers invest in building up these relationships. They join organizations that help support trade talks. They invest their money in supporting those trade relationships. When that goes away, when those trade relationships are hurt because of this approach, all that farmer investment is being hurt too.
Do you know many farmers who voted for Donald Trump who are now wondering why?
Well, I don't know if they not wonder necessarily why they might have voted for Donald Trump. To be honest, during the election, when farmers, my neighbors and my friends would tell me they were voting for Donald Trump, none of them told me it was going to be because they believe in this trade approach. There were other reasons that they were voting for Donald Trump, but none of it was the trade approach. In fact, they would say, "You don't think that this would happen again? Surely we learned last time. We had a huge bailout last time that didn't get to the right people very often. Surely we've learned and we're going to do better." Well, unfortunately, we're not doing better. In fact, we've done some things that are even worse. You know, one of those things, for instance, is we have built up good relationships around the world through providing aid when folks around the world need it. And a lot of that aid comes in the form of food that we grow. So that really helps us. It normally helps us because people around the world say, those US farmers, they're going to be good neighbors around the world. They're going to be good global partners, and they're going to be a reliable provider of the food that's part of this aid. Well, when we cut USAID programs, for one thing, it shows that we're not putting the effort to be good neighbors anymore. But it also says those farmers can't be relied upon anymore to be a reliable supplier of food around the world. So that really hurts us, and it hurts, and it takes a long time to build that relationship back up.
Well, you're not only being good neighbors, Aaron. I mean, farmers, American farmers are saving lives through feeding, starving people all over the world. And that is an important market for you. I mean, it's an incredible service that you can do. But many of those programs within USAID, well, the whole agency was pretty much hollowed out. So all
Yep.
those programs were stopped in their tracks.
Yeah, and there's unfortunately, you can't just build that relationship back up. Trade relationships are just built one trade at a time. Finding one good, reliable trade partner, acting in good faith, working through your differences. And whether that's through aid programs like USAID, or it's through what we sell to Mexico in corn, or in soybeans to China, all those things kind of build on one another, and you just can't flip the switch and expect it to come back. That's the real danger here. When we went through this 5 years ago, some of those buyers overseas found farmers in other countries, and they haven't come back yet. We've worked hard to rebuild those relationships, but some of them haven't come back yet, despite our best efforts. And that's the real danger here. Yes, short term, it hurts our bottom line. Our lenders, our creditors are worried. Farmers, can we work through our issues trying to find good financing for farmers this time of year? Yes, it hurts our bottom line, but it's our long-term future that really gets impacted too.
How confusing or detrimental are the administration's changing positions on tariffs? Donald Trump was asked about being inconsistent. He insisted he wasn't being inconsistent, he was being flexible. But it must be a confusing time for you all.
It very much is. The markets that the marketplace doesn't like volatility. Usually, that means that farmers are going to have some ups and downs, but usually our buyers are protecting themselves, and they're just going to pay less if there's that much volatility. That means farmers' bottom lines are hurt. It makes it a lot harder for us to farm. When this happens, it makes it very difficult for us to secure good financing to get the crop in the ground. Makes it a lot harder to plan for what we ought to plant, to understand what the marketplace is actually asking for. Then we react with how we plant, what we choose to plant. And the longer term impact is that we are having a situation in all of farm country where our farming population is getting older and older. Like the average age of the Iowa farmer is 57 years old. So when you're trying to make plans to bring on the next generation onto the farm, and you have all this uncertainty, it makes it very, very difficult, and farmers are less likely to make that jump because it takes a lot to bring on the next generation on the farm. And a lot of farmers will say it's just a too volatile time to make that big move. Unfortunately, that means our farming population gets older and older, and our farmers are less likely to bring on that next generation that we really need. We need it for a lot of reasons too, right? We want farmers to not only do a good job of farming the way they are, but farming is constantly changing, and we need to innovate. And that means bringing on the next generation to help us with those innovations and with farming to keep the farm going. But those innovations help us have farms that are more resilient, more friendly in a changing climate, contribute to good conservation practices that help all of us. Those innovations, including all the modernization that takes place in farming, all that stuff has to wait if you have this much uncertainty.
In addition to tariffs and dismantling USAID, which is affecting farmers in a big way, the Trump administration last week moved to cut more than $1 billion in USDA programs that help schools and food banks buy fresh food and meat. Before we get into those specific cuts, can you talk about what the Department of Agriculture does and how it works with and supports U.S. farmers?
Yeah, it supports farmers in a whole host of different ways. One of those things that has been really helpful to our farm is with conservation projects. We have entered into a number of things to make our farms more resilient, to help our soil health, to keep the soil on the land and stop nutrients from going into our waterways. Those conservation projects are almost always a partnership between the farmer and the USDA. And so much of that has been either frozen or altogether done away with recently. In addition, a lot of USDA employees who helped me figure out how to put these things in place on my farm and farms all over the country, a lot of those employees were fired. So our local offices remain understaffed, and a lot of the programs that farmers have implemented have been cut. Some even put in these practices and had them ready to go, had their reimbursements ready to be submitted, and yet they haven't been reimbursed for things that the USDA to agree to with farmers. So that really hurts us when we're trying to make our farms more resilient and to do more to contribute to a positive environment.
What do you think about the way these cuts have been made pretty quickly? And do you think enough thought was put behind them?
You know, when you it's disturbing to me. So I needed to gather myself just a moment.
Okay, take your time.
You know, when farmers make a commitment to do something, they're going to do it. And when a commitment is made between neighbors on the farm or with our local businesses, farmers are expected to hold up their end of the bargain, and they do, because it's part of the larger community. So when we make an agreement to put in place conservation projects and we use the government as a strong partner, we expect them to be a good partner with us. So having them cut right in the middle without even getting reimbursements in some farmers, other contracts not being honored, other programs being stopped without any warning, that's not efficient. That's not being a good, reliable partner, and it's not acting in good faith. And it's going to cost us money eventually. We're all about having good efficiencies on our farm. We want good efficiencies in our government. But putting in place practices like this, that's the opposite of efficient. That's going to waste money. That's going to waste resources. So when farmers hear about these cuts, the way they're being done, that tells us that this is not about efficiency.
I want to ask you about these USDA cuts in terms of how they affect people who are food insecure and families. Tell me about the relationship farmers have with these government programs that not only help farmers with what they're producing, but also help families.
Yeah, you know, we had a program here in Iowa. It's a really good example. You know, we've been trying to build these connections between farmers who are growing food in their community and with the local school district and with the local child care and with the local food banks, so that good, fresh local food could be placed in our schools, our child cares, and our food banks, so we had good local nutritious food for folks. This program had excellent results. It was making great progress, and all the returns from those programs would circulate within the local economy. So it was a good deal, not only for us for good nutrition, to feed our local folks, but it was also a great economic program. That program was set to continue for another 3 years here in Iowa, but on Monday it was cut with no warning. So that tells you that we have made a commitment to folks who have already bought seed, have already started planting seeds to be ready to be transplanted into the soil, have reserved space at the local processing facilities so that when that crop grows, it can be ready to be taken and used within our local communities. All those commitments have been made and plans have been made, and we pulled the rug out from all of those folks. That's a terrible signal we're giving to our farmers. It's a terrible signal we're giving to our rural communities. And it's not a good step at all for helping people who are food insecure. It's a little bit of it's a little bit misunderstood. You know, oftentimes we think that nutrition programs are primarily for folks who live in the city, but the statistics show us that our rural communities have real issues with food insecurity that are just as serious as it is for our neighbors who live in the city. And in fact, it's even harder in these rural communities to have access to good, fresh food. And that's really not right. For such an abundant place and we really need to do more to make sure that our food insecure folks are being taken care of.
What do you think is going to happen to those families without these programs?
Well, I think unfortunately the problem's just going to get worse that we have with food insecurity. That's the unfortunate part in all of this, is that not only are we going to see the impact with our farmers, but consumers are ultimately going to see the impact, whether their children are being fed at the local childcare or at local schools. But it's also all those things are going to filter down to the grocery store as well. You have to have a good partnership between farmers and consumers to have a healthy food system. You really can't do it without one without the other. And unfortunately, I think it's just going to lead to more food insecurity and ultimately to higher prices for those of us who are shopping at the grocery store.
USAID, which has been dismantled, as I mentioned, buys about $2 billion in agricultural products from U.S. farmers every single year. How big a hardship will this create, this vacuum?
Well, there's no way to make up for that in the short term. It is going to mean lower prices for what we grow. And what that means when farmers get lower prices, they immediately have to find other ways to make up for it on their farm. We're gonna buy less from the local machinery dealership, and the local machinery manufacturers are going to make less. We're going to have all those things have to happen eventually, but farmers are going to tighten their belt and not spend as they normally would.
So you think this will have a ripple effect in rural and farming communities?
Oh, absolutely. You know, in Iowa, we've had a number of large farm manufacturers, including John Deere, already make some layoffs because they saw the economic forecast was so uncertain, and the farmer demand for those new improvements went down, and that led to lots of layoffs in our rural community. And it reverberates all the way through a state like Iowa and so much of rural America.
America's most farming dependent counties overwhelmingly backed Donald Trump in 2024 by an average of 77.7% compared to a national average of 49.8%, a nearly 2 percentage point increase compared to when Trump ran in 2020. Why do you think Iowans and other farmers show consistent support of Donald Trump, even after the damage his 2018 trade war with China inflicted on so many farmers?
Well, not all farmers are the same, right? Some farmers are going to vote for a lot of different reasons, whether it's the overall picture that they see or the what they want to see in a candidate. And there are some, of course, who are going to look at the nitty gritty of farm economics and how USDA is going to be treated under. But there's a lot of different reasons that people talk about with why they might choose a particular candidate. And certainly there were a lot of farmers who chose not to because they saw that the damage inflicted 5 years ago, whether it be with trade or with other parts of the farm economy, or how farmers are treated when they're doing conservation projects on their farm. A lot of farmers said that is not the route we want to go. So it's a little hard to classify as farmers all voting the same way. What I will tell you, though, is that when farmers reach out to me about why we're pursuing certain farm policies and others, none shared to me that they voted for Donald Trump because they liked the tariff-heavy policy, the trade war policy. the massive cuts to USDA, whether it be at our research facilities with the USDA or our local offices, um, very few chose to vote for Donald Trump because of that, from what the feedback I've got.
Having said that, have you heard any farmers who voted for Donald Trump express buyer's remorse given the tariffs, USAID cuts, and USDA cuts?
Well, this is what I hear more of than a particular buyer's remorse. We're so close to the beginning of the growing season. There's so much going on this type of year. It's more worried about what's going to happen to our farm, what's going to happen to our family finances, and in the meantime, what's going to happen to try to correct some of these things that are happening. 5 years ago, there was a trade bailout that was fashioned, and it's right to try to compensate farmers for something that is no fault of their own at all. But too much of the aid went to only the largest farmers in our farm community, and many small to medium-sized farmers didn't get any, or they certainly didn't get compensated fairly. So there's a lot of concern. Will that happen again? If that fallout continues, will there be another way to help farmers? But I think there's increasingly a lot of worry about that. Donald Trump was pretty clear that he expected to do well in farm country because he was going to try to provide aid, and he was going to have to do that in order to get votes for the next time he was on the ballot, whether in the Iowa caucuses or on the general election. Well, he's not going to be on the ballot anymore. Will there still be the concern for Iowa farmers if there isn't this transactional policy put in place? That's why it's so important that we're really reaching out to our lawmakers here in Iowa, our governor, our secretary of agriculture, our members of Congress. They know how important these issues are. We're expecting them to speak up and to speak loudly, because trade issues and conservation issues for what we're trying to do on the farm, and even a lot of our food issues, there is a large consensus, bipartisan, rural, urban, in places like Iowa, about how important these things are. So we need to speak loudly and with as unified a voice as we possibly can, so that the president and the USDA understand how important these things are.
Well, some of these decisions have been made, Aaron, and I can't believe that there aren't farmers who are really ticked off at the administration.
More and more they are, and they're not happy about it. And they expect our folks here in Iowa. Iowa's a very good farm state, right? We're very productive. We have the second highest number of farm sales in the country, only behind California. And we only have 6 congresspeople, 2 senators, 2 U.S. House of Representatives, or 4 people in our U.S. House of Representatives. 4 out of those 6 sit on the Ag Committee. They understand very clearly what's going on, and they have a lot of voice that they could raise to the administration, and they are hearing about the concerns. In fact, there's been some pullback on some of their outreach efforts within the state. Some of their listening opportunities at the state have been curtailed because they're hearing so much that they were feeling overwhelmed and thought they didn't need to do that outreach anymore.
Have there been town halls in Iowa where farmers express their concerns?
Absolutely, there have. And we went out of our way in our farmers union to say, hey, let's make this easy. Let's do a webinar. We can do it anytime between 7:30 in the morning and 8 o'clock at night. And we got response from one of our 6 members of Congress. Senator Grassley joined us, and we had an overwhelming response, 3 times the normal response we would expect for something like this. And it was about tariffs. It was about USDA cuts. It was about other firing USDA employees. People were worried about our USDA research facilities. Who's going to feed those research animals? What's going to happen to that research seed? Is that going to be, are those programs going to be put in place? Even the Weather Service, we're hearing concerns because, we rely on, where we live in a place where there's a lot of violent weather, and private weather services are pulling resources out of the state. We rely on the government to provide us good warnings about violent weather. Even those facilities were facing severe cutbacks. So the senator was hearing a lot of concerns from our farmers, and we were asking, how can we unify our voices here and bring our concerns forward? And unfortunately, while some folks are pulling back on their listening opportunities to citizens, we got encouragement, which I'm very happy to hear, to keep our voices strong. And we are doing that. Our farmers are keeping their voices strong, and they're reaching out to our Iowa policy leaders, that are reaching out to our governor, our Secretary of Agriculture. I think they need to hear those voices and start bringing their concerns together so that the administration can really understand what's happening.
Not to lead the witness, but is it safe to say that U.S. farmers are getting screwed by these policies?
They're definitely feeling screwed by these policies. They're feeling like the rug is being pulled out from underneath them. That commitments that they made are not being honored. Promises that are not being kept. And who's ultimately going to pay for that? It's going to be our rural communities that are going to be less secure. Our food system is going to be less secure. Our efforts to make a more healthy landscape are going to suffer. All those things are what happens in the end when those commitments to farmers aren't being kept.
I'm curious, do you know people who voted for Donald Trump who are farmers who still support him given these policy shifts?
Well, I haven't had an in-depth conversation enough to know if they had to vote again, what they would do. They're very concerned. I think it's not there right now. Some are definitely thinking that wasn't a good idea. Others are probably thinking, hey, if we bring our voice loud enough, we're going to be heard. If we bring our concerns in that show what's happening, show what the impact is going to be, we can make a difference now. So it varies from farmer to farmer where people stand on it.
I imagine Elon Musk isn't super popular in your neck of the woods.
No, I don't think that there's a lot of trust. If we were to see another farm handled the way our USDA has been handled, we would say that farmer's in a lot of trouble. Something is wrong. And unfortunately, something's clearly wrong with how the USDA is treating farmers right now.
At the beginning of the month, President Trump gave the first joint address to Congress in his second term. In that address, he said, "Our new trade policy will also be great for the American farmer." I love the farmer, who will now be selling into our home market, the USA, because nobody is going to be able to compete with you, because those goods that come in from other countries and companies, they're really, really in a bad position in so many different ways. They're uninspected. They may be very dirty and disgusting, and they come in and they pour in and they hurt our American farmers. What was your reaction, Aaron, when you heard Donald Trump say this?
The fact of the matter is that there is no way to make up for that kind of loss just with what we can use in this country. That is not based on any sort of farm economy reality at all. Farmers don't believe that. They hope that a better approach is going to be taken and that we are going to regain our position with our trade partners. But in no way do they think that we can, in the United States, we simply turn on a switch and replace all the uses of our product without having good trade partnerships around the world.
So you would say Donald Trump was wrong in that assessment?
Oh, I would say it. Our economists at Iowa State University and all of our agriculture land grant institutions would say it. Farmers would say it because they know that it's true. That's just not based in reality, that we can just do away with our export markets for so much of what we grow here in Iowa.
A significant number of people who work in U.S. agriculture are, in fact, undocumented. Given the zealousness to deport all these people, what impact is that going to have on the American farmer, in your view?
Yeah, it's very clear that we here in Iowa and agriculture regions all around the country rely on a high amount of migrant labor, and it cannot simply be replaced. It is, I think farmers have a pretty clear understanding that there has to be a solution that rewards people who are providing so much of the labor for what we grow and bringing that product all the way to the marketplace. We need a solution. Now, of course, there are concerns about having secure borders and having a sound policy. But that doesn't mean that we need to turn our back on the folks who are providing so much of the heavy lifting to help us bring our product to market.
What's going to happen if all these people get deported and you no longer have them available to work at farms across the country?
Yeah, in the short term, there would be no way to continue to milk all the cows, to raise all the livestock, to process all the food that goes to market. There would be a huge amount of supply that would never get off the farm and to market. So we would have a drastic resizing of what farms can grow, and ultimately that's going to lead to drastically higher prices. It will lead to a lot of food inflation, and it'll cause and that's what I would say from an economic standpoint is going to happen. From the reality is that so many of our rural communities have integrated folks into our community that have provided a tremendous amount of hard work at bringing our product to market. And that's why they may have come here, but they've integrated into the community that have led to many of our communities becoming more diverse and more healthy, and helped build the vitality of our rural communities. You know, we in Iowa, out of all the school districts we have spread out all across the state, we're really proud of our rural school districts in Iowa. 2/3 of our school districts are losing kids from year to year.
Because so many people are leaving Iowa to go to big cities, right?
That's exactly right. And when a school district is shrinking, it becomes so difficult to maintain the level of service for the kids who are there to provide a good educational environment. We're doing all sorts of things to try to build our rural areas. If we were to do this mass deportation, it would devastate a lot of our rural communities, in addition to devastating a big portion of our farm economy.
I did a story in Storm Lake, Iowa.
Oh, good.
And, basically was told that these communities, without the influx of these immigrants from countries all over the world, would pretty much shrivel up and die. They're keeping these communities going. And they have been embraced in an incredibly and made these communities much more inclusive.
Oh, that is absolutely true. And of course, there are communities go through change, and sometimes that is difficult. It was hard when my ancestors from Switzerland came to our little community down the road here 150 years ago, and we knew that there was going to be Even then, we know that there were issues with dealing with those changes. But our communities are constantly changing. Agriculture is constantly changing, and building that diversity and receiving those communities into our rural communities is essential for us to have a healthy state. And the idea that folks who have come and contributed so much to our communities, so much to our agriculture system, to be treated this way, it's so unfair. And ultimately, we all will feel the pain of it.
I know that you're hoping that the voices of farmers will be heard in Washington. If you had a chance to have a meeting with President Trump, what would you say to him, Aaron?
Well, the investments in farmers, in farming communities, really make a difference, right? So when we have programs that partner with farmers, we rely on that partnership to be upheld and to be contracts to be honored and to be that partnership to be honored. And that's extremely important. Farmers feel betrayed when those partnerships are not honored. In addition to that, we know that when we make decisions about trade, the real impact hits our farming communities first and hits our farmers the most. And that ultimately is going to lead to rural communities that are under stress and ultimately will make it harder for us to find good, healthy places to live.
Aaron Lehman, fifth generation Iowa farmer and president of the Iowa Farmers Union. Aaron, thank you for helping us understand the impact these policies are having on American farmers. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.